welcome everyone to this session webinar on gender equality. We are here today to accelerate action. And the theme of gender equality is still very, very timely to this day. I have a panel with me here today. My name is Pernille Hippebrun, and I'm the CEO of Session and the moderator of this webinar. And Gine, would you care to introduce yourself?
Of course, and thanks for having me on this important topic. So Gine Kampmann is my name, and I'm the CEO of a think tank called Equalis, based in Denmark, focusing on how the status is on gender equality in the labor market. I have a background from consulting, strategy work, and I guess that's just briefly on me, and then I can say a few more words on Equalis when we get to it.
Yes, thank you, Gine. And then Dave.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Dave from the Netherlands. I'm the co-founder and co-CEO of Women's Movement. You might wonder, why is a man a co-founder of Women's Movement? I will explain that later to you. And I'm very happy here to be with you and to explain more about our work.
Awesome. So whenever we have a webinar, we are looking into who should be on the panel, who would be the right people to discuss the topic of our webinars. And this time around, I'm very, very excited that we have both someone who can actually explain some of the facts for us, who can talk about what is the current status of gender equality, especially from the Danish or the Nordic perspective, because many of your numbers are from Denmark, but we'll also see some numbers from the world where we can actually still tell that there is a need for a webinar like this. And then we have Dave, who can tell us about a very, very concrete initiative that accelerates action around the globe called Boss Women, and you'll talk way more about that in a minute, Dave, when we get to you. But I'm very excited about having both the perspective of the facts and seen from the perspective of what's actually going on in the world with gender equality, and then why it's so important to be able to speak from facts, and then also have some concrete ideas for how to accelerate action. This year's theme of International Women's Day 2025 is Accelerate Action. That's why we have the hashtag all over, and you'll see much more of that in the coming days, I'm sure. And every year we have this International Women's Day coming up, where we put spotlight on women around the globe. And this year for our webinar, I was thinking, so what does it actually look like? And when we look around, for instance, the things that we take for granted in many parts of the world, that we can get the jobs we want as women, that is actually not necessarily true. There are many countries where women are not allowed to take certain jobs just because of their gender. So that is one of the facts that we can look at. We can also look at how many women are actually quoted when it comes to media, when it comes to being an expert in a panel or whatever. And also there, we see actually more women now are quoted in the news compared to 10 years ago. But it's still double as many men quoted when we look at expert views or thoughts in the media. So there's a long way to go. And we also still have the wage gap. If you look at how many cents do each woman earn for every dollar men earn, there's still this huge gap. So there's a way to go. And the reason why this is happening, and Gine will also talk way more about that, is also because of the segregation we see. So what kind of jobs is it that more women take? And very many women are still caregivers. They are the ones who take the jobs who are lower paid around the globe. So that explains part of it, but not all. So we also have the unpaid work gender gap, where we see that women, to a larger extent than men, still take most of the toll when it comes to all the duties at home and the caregiving for family members and things like that. So I believe this topic is still of high relevance and that we really need to put a spotlight on it. One of the last things I want to show you before I give the word to you, Gine, talk, way more about these numbers here is how many of us actually fund companies and how many of us get to earn the CEO title. And also there we see a huge gender gap still, where only 11% of Fortune 500 companies around the globe are led by female CEOs. And when you look at the startup community, and I know some of you who joins us today probably have startups of your own, we only get 1.8% of the total funding granted to people around the globe. So there are still, ways to go when it comes to create gender equality around the world. And Gine, I would like to first of all hear what brought you into your current position. And you're the CEO. You're one of the the ones, maybe not a Fortune 500 company, but a think tank. And then you're also representing Denmark in the European Council for Experts for Gender Equality, right? So what brought you to take up this theme for yourself, and what has brought you here?
I think so as I mentioned just briefly, I have a background in consulting, and I also did a bit of strategy work for a large industry company here in Denmark. And then what happened to me was I had my first kid, and I think what we know from research as well is that this happens to a lot of, especially women, that when they have their first child or the second, they really start to think about their career choices. What do they want to spend their life doing? What are they passionate about? And I think from my perspective, I could really just see from the different discussions that was going on around gender inequality in the Danish labor market specifically, that was just so high level, so anecdotal discussions. We didn't really get anywhere, like circled around the same question of, do we really have challenges with gender equality in Denmark for for as long as I've lived, basically. So I think just focusing in on that and seeing that being a challenge that continued, and then coming from a background of, if you want to change something from a company perspective, we know how to do it. We do strategic development projects all the time. We increase revenue. We retain our people if we want to. So it's more or less a matter of why is this not moving? And I really wanted to work more with that. So when I got back to work after my parental leave, I was so lucky to see the Equalis being established. So that's almost 3 years ago now, this June. And I applied for the CEO position and I got it. So and now I'm basically just working with my passion every day, but from a very data-driven, research-driven perspective, trying to move the needle in kind of like a three-way combination of knowledge, political actions, and the business community. And I really think that's also like the combination we need to see move closer in order to really move the needle on this.
And what is it exactly that Equalis does, the company?
So what we do is that we try to take the knowledge that we have from a Danish perspective, research-wise, data-wise, to build to really also accelerate action. So try to get past and beyond the question of, do we have challenges with gender equality in Denmark, to see what are the challenges and where do we need to prioritize from a political standpoint, but definitely also just from a business community standpoint. We both generate knowledge ourselves, so publish new papers, but we also take research that's already out there and try to work with it, curate it in a way that makes it, easier to make decisions upon. And we're heavily focused in on actions as well. So try to see, what do we really know from research works when it comes to this in a business community perspective. And what I also find really motivating from a think tank organizational view is that we we're just driven by what's out there research wise, and we're and kind of like an NGO, where when we don't make any profit. We're not a commercial company, so we don't have any like commercial interests that drives us. And I think coming from management consulting, I think that's really that was one of the important things for me, is that this needs to be just driven by what's the best for the agenda, and not for a company in terms of driving up revenue. So yeah, so basically that's what we do. We try to push the needle for equal opportunities based on data and research.
Yeah, and speaking of data, you just released a barometer last week, I believe, right? And I want to show this barometer just so that we have an idea of what is it your company does, or your think tank does. And also, I think this is relevant on a global perspective, because maybe when we want to move the needle, we need more institutions like that to actually speak from facts. So the UN Women does that. That were the numbers I showed before were based on the UN Women's research on gender inequality or inequality around the globe. But this is kind of your barometer, and it has 22 dimensions, I believe. Maybe you can tell us what is it this barometer shows.
So basically why we built this is that we could see from the public debate and the general lack of actions on this topic that everything was focusing in on anecdotal evidence. So everyone's own opinion could have the same weight as research. And we really thought to ourselves, we often heard the argument, we've seen these numbers, or we know this, but that's not from a Danish perspective. We need the Danish numbers, we need the Danish knowledge to really move the needle in Denmark, which is, a lot of the research that we have in the data can be transferred, but nonetheless, we said to ourselves, let's build the data set then. Let's try to erase the anecdotes from anecdotal evidence, to just say, let's make it all about evidence. So we built this concept, the diversity barometer, which is mapping gender representation in the Danish labor market for these 5 overall themes: education and career, work environment, labor market attachment, responsibility and management, and income and assets. And what we did is that we're polling once a year. We're polling numbers from central register data to try to see, where do women and men work, how do they thrive, what do they earn, and so on. And we took all of these numbers, a lot of numbers. When we did it last week, we worked with a data set of 600 data points, or 600 numbers, which is a lot of data on, fully representative of the population in Denmark. And we put up an index trying to compare, like, where do we see the biggest challenges on representation, but also, being able to follow the numbers year by year. Because what we also could see in a lot of the public debates in Denmark is that we kind of lose an overview of, or we lack an overview of where we are at, and if we're doing any progress at all. And I think coming from anecdotal evidence, then people would often think we're talking a lot about gender equality, but if we aren't able to see it in the numbers, it's not enough, right? So it's also trying to debunk the myth of that we're seeing progress, because what you can see in the numbers from what you just showed, Pernille, is that there's not a lot of stuff happening from the 3 years we've done this, the diversity barometer, and very little progress. The only progress we've seen over these 3 years is an increase in women when it comes to top management levels in the public sector in Denmark. We also have 70% of the people working in the public sector in Denmark are women, and we see from the top management levels that 47% are women. So there's a lot of women in the sector, and we almost hit 50-50 on gender equality when on top management. We could also see a small progress when it comes to how we split parental leave in Denmark, because we just implemented an increased earmarked leave option coming from an EU directive, with earmarking an equal split between mom and dad in just a binary family situation, where we saw men increasing their average weeks on parental leave with 4 weeks. We still see, though, a general that women take in general like 31 weeks more on parental leave than men. So, a progress, but still very unequal. And the third thing I want to say when it comes to progress is that we also try to assess like the full income of everything we own, everything we have in shares, and what we, our fortune basically. We saw a difference of 67% that men earn more than women, which is now down with 5 percentage points. So still, a very huge difference, but some progress there. For all the other parameters, no development has happened. No progress has happened. When we look at women in top management in the private sector, we see in Denmark women taking up 18% of CEO positions in the private sector. Right, that's not a lot of women. And the increase we've seen through the last 3 years is 1 percentage point. That adds to up to 40 women more over 3 years. Right. So that's just one example of the lack of progress. And for some of the income measures we have, we've even seen an increase in salary inequality. So that's just a brief overview and why we work with data, to be able to follow like the numbers very, very close, and to be able to argue where do we see the biggest inequalities, and there's just a lack of progress year after year.
And what was the thing that maybe surprised you the most when you started looking at these numbers here and seeing the themes and how it played out? What was one of the things that surprised you the most, maybe, but also maybe shocked you the most?
I think the biggest shock I had was when I saw the difference in income and assets. In a Danish setting, when the difference between men and women's full pension funds income is the biggest, there's 1 million in difference, right? 1 million Danish kroner, which is, that's a lot of money on average, right? Meaning that that for some families or for some people that it would be an even larger difference. So I think some of those numbers really shocked me, and then also just seeing. Especially in the Danish business community, we have this, there's a lot of conversations in the biggest companies that gender equality is important. We want more women in top management, but we just don't see anything happening in the numbers. And I think that comes from also like the Nordic gender equality paradox, which is perhaps also something that some listeners can recognize, like coming from a Nordic perspective, is that we have this welfare system that has enabled women to fully step into the labor market and take some of the, relieve some of the childcare responsibilities, and also also provide some benefits if you're divorced and you end up, with a lack of money or whatever. But the welfare system is somehow also what's still retaining us, because it keeps on like reproducing gender stereotypes in how we policy design, right? Which is kind of like the Nordic gender equality paradox in general, and it also just sets into people's mindset of how big of an issue is this really. I think just so coming from a kind of like an overall perspective on what then surprised me when we published the diversity barometer in the first place was that even though the data was there and it's there, black and white numbers, you still hear the question of, but isn't this just because women have different preferences and they just want to be, they're wiser than men because they don't want to be top managers, and that's, they choose the better life and so on. So still a lot of arguments you meet, even though you have the numbers that can support some of the, just the facts.
Yeah, and so, but that question about, isn't it just because they don't want to take it? What would your answer be to that? They have equal rights. We have equal rights. We could just take it, couldn't we?
When we look at the numbers on, also just educational, when we look at who graduates from higher educational levels in Denmark, you see women, being there much more than men. So women on average are more educated than men. We also see just up until the first kid we have in families, salaries follow the same progress. Career developments follow more or less the same progress. But when that first kid hits, that's where the inequality sets in. And then it becomes a matter of like equal opportunities to both live up to gender stereotypes, and also meet companies or meet opportunities in a company setting with equity designed into processes, where we still see a lot of companies giving men more giving them higher positions than women, increasing their salaries more than women, because we lack transparency. We lack like a really objective way of working with competencies. So there's a lot of facts-based and research-based conclusions that points towards this is not because women doesn't want it. It's because they have unequal opportunities in getting there, due to gender stereotypes and norms, but definitely also due to how we build our pipeline for leadership in companies.
And what are some of those gender stereotypes? What could they be, for instance?
For example, how much parental leave you're expected to spend or to use away from work when you have your first kid, which is, for a lot of people in Denmark, it's been kind of like a victory to see the earmarked leave being implemented in 2022, because now we, even though it was almost equal before how we could split it law-wise, women would still use 80% of the leave that was, that's there. But now we see with men, being able to spend more time on leave with pay, it's much more. They're much more supported to actually stay at home with their kids. We see a bit of a rise in the stay-at-home dads as well, which kind of shifts some of this gender stereotypical way of splitting the work responsibilities at home. But that's some of the stuff that you could meet both, as women and men. Also, men being asked the question of, when they are out for parental leave, have a good vacation. Like if you've ever had a kid and you're on leave, it's not a vacation to spend, to be on parental leave. It's pretty hard work, right? So and also just also now moving to a place where we assume that men, of course, want to be at home with their newborn, which was definitely not how it was before, and some of that shift on the men's role, and when it comes to being a caregiver, we also see a bit in the role of the women, but still not to the same extent. So we still see and can see in numbers women experiencing questions of okay, you've been on leave for 6 months. In Denmark, you can be up on leave for a year full time with in combination with your kid. And if you only spend 6 months as a mom, you get raised eyebrows, right? You're like, but please take care of your kid. Are your kid doing okay? And the same goes for everything that's combined with a mother role as well. So that's just some of the gender stereotypes we see when it comes to the caregiver role. And at work, there's a lot of bias on double standards that women meet. In general, we know from research that women need to perform much more than men before there's potential spotted in them as managers, for example, or as future leaders. Women are not as likable if they're good at their job than men are. We like men that both are leaders and have kids because we applaud them. They can do both. If the same holds true for women, we think that we assume that something must be wrong with them or their kids, because if they're that much at work, then some things are not right at home. And all of these double standards then, are combined into to the unequal opportunities that we see.
Okay, great, thank you. And I would like to open this up also for you, Dave, to comment on. So why is that a problem? Why is it a problem that we see this gender inequality? Because we also see in some ways men are also discriminated if they want to take up a job within a sector that's usually considered a women's sector. So we also see discrimination there. But why is it a problem that we have gender inequality in the world?
Well, good question. Thanks, Gina, for the introduction. And first of all, I have to say that in many Dutch discussions, we always refer to the Nordics as being way more ahead on these issues. So put some reality check there. And there's, I think, also a lot to do there. And for me, it's also, you can listen to it at a rational level to these things, but also at an emotional level. And for me, it's just very painful to hear these things like this income gap and asset gap between men and women. It's just so unfair from an emotional point of view. And I have 3 kids, 2 daughters, 1 boy. And if you look at the future of my own kids, like this equal opportunity, for me, it's just something as a human being, which is so logical to do. And also, I think like in the world right now, if you look at, it's very easy to look at if masculinity is not in balance with healthy femininity. You just have to watch the TV and see what happens. So I think on all levels, we need to balance and connect this. And for me personally, it was like, I used to be a management consultant also. And then I went on a last minute holiday to West Africa. And during that holiday, I went into the communities, and I met people who were so passionate about their future and so willing to learn that for me, it was a kind of reflection on my own privilege. And I felt like the most privileged people in the world are white guys like me, being raised in a good family, having access to all the education, having the network. There's so many doors that open for me, like which I don't even know. So for me, that trip triggered, I think, in hindsight, also my thinking about, wow, how unequal is this world, and what can I do about it? And then back in 2003, I started my own social enterprise with the idea of giving local people who were working on these issues access to the same kind of leadership development opportunities that we get at corporate levels with the same quality. So I started a company doing leadership programs in mostly Africa, but it went all around the world. And in one of these programs, I'll never forget, we were with a group of professionals from Western companies and local people. And we were about 25 people in a very engaging program. But in the break of the program, it was like the rest of the village came in asking us, what are you doing? And we want to learn this. It was like starting a new program in the break. And I think many of them were women. And I felt like, wow, in this ocean of, let's say, inequality, poverty, patriarchy, women are so much excluded from education, but also from, for example, asset ownership or income. And then the question was like, I started to discuss this with my African mentor, a Gambian wise man. And he said, Dave, you can start a school, but the problem is women won't go to that school because it's either too far, they can't leave their kids, the threshold is too high, it's too expensive. And then I got the idea, like, what if we bring the school to them if they can't come to a school? And that was the idea of the school on wheels that led to Buzz Women. And luckily, this man with this fake idea met a phenomenal woman when I was working in India with a leadership team in the microfinance industry. And I got connected to an Indian lady called Uttara. And Uttara's life purpose was really around how do people get out of poverty, and especially women. And she always felt like it has to be more than just access to money. There's another dimension there. And I think like when you're saying like we're not making progress, it also feels like there is another dimension that we cannot really touch on many times. And I felt like with Uttara, we started the journey in 2012, 13 years ago, to start bringing education to the women. In many ways, is in a different shape than I ever imagined. But I think it's nice. We have some 3 minutes video where my co-founder Uttara is explaining the work, showing some, let's say, real images from India, how it works. And then after, I'll pick it up and explain where we are, what we do, and how that links to gender inequality.
Thank you. Let's see the video.
ತಂದನ್ನು tanandano tano tanandano tano tanandano tano ಬನ್ನಿರಕ್ಕ ಬನ್ನಿರಿ ಬನ್ನಿರಮ್ಮ ಬನ್ನಿರಿ ಬನ್ನಿರಕ್ಕ ಬನ್ನಿರಿ.
I think the biggest injustice in the world is not the lack of wealth. It's the lack of opportunity and choice. And that's what Buzz addresses. It makes available an opportunity to the women to understand themselves and understand what's out there. Accessibility is key. Most of these women live in areas where the transport is not available for them. And also there are so many responsibilities that a woman faces. Family, farm, animals, kids. Going to their doorsteps makes it easy for them to come out of their houses and access the opportunity given.
ಬೆಳೆ ಬೆಳೆದಿರ್ತೀವಿ, ಬುದ್ಧಿ ಉಪಯೋಗಿಸಿ ಮಾರಾಟನೂ ಮಾಡಿರ್ತೀವಿ.
The aim is for the women to find their inner strength. It could be around financials, it could be about building a business, it could be about solving a personal problem that they have. But finding their inner strength to do all of that.
Good. Yes. ತಂದನೋ ತಾನೋ ತಂದನೋ ತಾನೋ ತಾನಂದನೋ ತಾನೋ ತಂದನೋ ತಾನೋ ತಂದನೋ.
When I met Devamma 7 years back, she said she wanted 50 euros from me because she was in a lot of debt. She had a business from where she didn't know how much she was earning. She had an abusive ecosystem at home. And she was in a place, a remote village from where she had no access to any opportunity. But I said, I'm not giving you the money, but you come join our training program.
ಆರು ವರ್ಷದ ಹಿಂದೆ ಜೀವನ ಈಗ ನೆನೆಸ್ಕೊಂಡ್ರೆ ನಾನೇನಾ ಅಂತಂದು ನನಗೆ ನಾನೇ ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆ ಹಾಕ್ಕೊತೀನಿ. ಅವಾಗ ಇದ್ದಿದ್ದಕ್ಕೂ ಈಗ ನಾನು ಬದಲಾಗಿರೋದಕ್ಕೂ ಬದಲಾಗ್ತಾ ಇರೋದಕ್ಕೂ ತುಂಬಾ ನನಗೆ ಆಶ್ಚರ್ಯ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ. ನನ್ನ ಜೀವನದಲ್ಲಿ ಬದಲಾವಣೆ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡಿದ್ದು ಅಂದರೆ ಫಸ್ಟು ನಾನು ಏನೇನು ಸಾಲ ಮಾಡ್ತಾಯಿದ್ದೀನಿ ಅದನ್ನು ನಾನು ಕಡಿಮೆ ಮಾಡಿದೆ. ಮತ್ತು ಮಾತುಗಾರಿಕೆ, ಕಸ್ಟಮರ್ನ ಹತ್ರ ಹೆಂಗೆ ಮಾತಾಡಬೇಕು, ಮನೇಲಿ ಜೀವನ ಹೆಂಗೆ ಮಾತಾಡಬೇಕು, ನಂದೆಷ್ಟು ತಪ್ಪೈತೆ, ಯಾರ ಮಾತು ಎಷ್ಟು ಕೇಳಬೇಕು, ಎಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವು ಅಗತ್ಯ ಇದ್ದಷ್ಟು ಖರ್ಚು ಮಾಡಬೇಕು ಅನ್ನೋದು ಫಸ್ಟು ಜೀವನದಲ್ಲಿ ಅಳವಡಿಸ್ತೀನಿ. ಬಸ್ ಇಂಡಿಯಾ ನನಗೆ ಹಣ ಕೊಡದೇ ಇರ್ಬೋದು, ಬಟ್ ಜ್ಞಾನ ಕೊಟ್ಟಿದೆ. ಹಣ ಯಾವ ರೀತಿ ಸಂಪಾದನೆ ಮಾಡ್ಬೋದು ಅನ್ನೋ ಒಂದು ದಾರಿ ತೋರಿಸಿದೆ ಅಂತ ನಾನು ತಿಳ್ಕೊಂಡಿದ್ದೀನಿ.
I think the most important change that I have noticed post the program is the confidence that it builds in people.
Yeah. So Dave, this was your way of accelerating action, right?
Yeah, but it went a little bit out of hand in a way because we started with this idea of the bus, and in the beginning we got stuck in the mud and the women didn't show up, but we found out that it really fills a great need, and there's a great need of women to get access to this kind of education. If you fast forward to where we are now, we've almost educated now 750,000 women in 7 countries. We're opening new countries, and we feel it has really become a movement owned by these women, where they say this is not an outside NGO coming to help us, but we own this, and that's how we orchestrated, let's say, the model as well. So I never imagined it to grow it like that. And at the same time, I'm just very impressed by seeing the power of women coming together with a lot of intrinsic motivation, the willingness to change their lives. And I think it's true. Like if you change a woman's life, she starts to change her family, to influence the next generation. She will change her community, and that's what we see back in our data about the impact we have.
So if we are to take some of the learnings from your journey, starting a movement like this, and then letting it go out of your hands and into the hands of thousands of people who carry this forward. And maybe, Gina, I would also like to invite you into this part of the question, because what is it we can see? What are the DNA in that way of building a movement that we can maybe build on also in companies today?
Yeah, for me, it was like, you don't start it with, at least we didn't, with the idea of making it a movement. So we just wanted to make sure that what we did made sense for at least one woman and hopefully a few women. And we started to engage with them, talking about what is the real issue here. And Uttara went out there and asked the women, what is it you need? And we had these fluffy ideas of they need kind of talent development or leadership development. And the women said, you go away with your training and stuff. We are in poverty. We want to change our lives. We need money. And if you can help us with that, you're welcome. But then diving deeper in the conversations, we found like, yeah, underneath that lack of money and that structural poverty, there's on the one hand, there's a lack of skills and how to manage their money, the difference between income and profit, and the way to set up your enterprise, which has to do with the lack of access to education. But if you go one level deeper even, then you get to the interesting part where I feel the real transformation happens. And that's really at the personal level, where all these women, they grow up in a system of patriarchy and poverty. And as a girl and a woman, your life is being planned by other people. You're just serving others, and nobody's asking you, what is your dream? What is your talent? And in a way, that's the normal that they live into. And the moment I saw the training for the first time in India, I couldn't understand the thing. It was in the local language. But the way the women were engaged in this, I've never seen it before. And I did a lot of workshops and trainings in my life. But this is not a nice to have. This is something they really want. And their eyes start to shine, and it's like their inner strength gets back, and they're reminded of the potential they have inside them. And they stop second guessing themselves. And because of the solidarity, because we train them in groups, after the first trainings, they choose their own leader. We call her an anchor woman, just she's chosen by the women. And that anchor woman starts to lead sessions on a weekly or bi-weekly basis in her own village. So she helps the women to come together, build the safety. So it's like a safe and brave space they create. And we kind of train and facilitate these leaders, these anchor women. And by now we have 15,000 of these ladies on a voluntary basis running this in their communities. And then we said like, oh, wow, what is the needs of the group again? And then we felt like they're all entrepreneurial, but some are real entrepreneurs. So they want access to what we would call incubator kind of training. The skills, marketing, how to grow their business. And so 10 out of the 30 women basically go to that training. Everything they learn, they bring it back to the group. And we see from our data, these women grow in income like 75% every year with their business. And then we filed from the women, they said, yeah, it's nice to talk about business, but the land we use for our gardening, it's dry, and it's either too much rain or too less, and the crops are not growing. So the whole impact of climate change became very apparent. So we started to develop a concept around that. So one thing led to the other, basically. And we felt like this whole idea of transferring the ownership to these anchor women. So we kickstarted with the bus you saw in the video. For me, like really creating ownership and letting go of the control on our side, that I think led to the spreading of this movement. And now these women say, it's we bus, it's our movement. We lead it. And we say we have 15,000 CEOs, and these are the women, the anchor women leading the groups. And that's how it's kind of started to spread around the world.
Interesting. And Gine, maybe you can also comment on this, because we know also from research that there's the individual training, and how individuals, women themselves, can of course learn how to speak up and carry themselves and be assertive and things like that, and say yes and no to the right things and things like that. That's individual competences. But then you also have the structure and the whole industries, and you talk about the patriarchy around people, Dave. But Gine, what does your research show, and your experience? What are some of the solutions for companies if they want to change the way forward?
Yeah, I really like what you're saying, Dave. How I would almost interpret it is like, are we handling or facing head on like the symptoms or the root causes, right? And then what you're talking into is like a root cause focus, which I really, a structural root cause focus, which I really support, and which is this, it's also the same approach you need to see from a business community perspective or from a company perspective. So instead of like saying, let's fix, what you're talking to, Pernille, is kind of also like, are we fixing the women or are we fixing the system, right? And we need to fix the system. There's nothing wrong with women on average. There's nothing wrong with men on average. It's the system, right? So let's try to move the needle on some structural changes. And what typically, what's good from a company perspective is, and I said this to begin with as well, is, this is not different from any other strategic development project you would do. Also, like the question on the movement, where does it come from? We strongly support that it comes from top management. It needs to be like a focus of, and of course, there's different paths to making it a top management priority, but it needs to be driven like we do with any other strategic project, which is, setting a strategic goal, building data on where do we see your own challenges, figuring out, because what typically also happens in a lot of companies, I think, is that they try to search for that quick fix, that's one fit all solution, and it doesn't exist because it depends on the specific company. It depends on, like, from your full employee journey, from you do employee branding to you let go of your people in exit conversations. There's just risk of inequality, inequity in all of those touch points. And you need to figure out from your own company perspective, in which of these touch points do we have challenges specifically within our walls, and then try to search for, like, if this is our specific challenge, and of course there'll often be more than one. What are then the initiatives that will actually help us? Because often, the companies are not really searching within their processes. They're more searching on, some, and this is I think some might find it a bit provoking, but they're searching on marketing stuff or like, bathrooms. Do we have unisex bathrooms, or, how do people feel included on all of that? But when it comes to career development and equal opportunities, it's in the processes and it's in the leadership approach, which you need to treat like you would any other strategic project, basically.
So we see some of the solutions in initiatives like this, check your policies and practices and build inclusive culture and leadership and provide growth opportunities and ensure transparent communication and all these good advice might be there, and people might also believe that this is actually happening and this is what we're doing. But we actually have a very interesting question from one in our audience that I would like to pose right now, from Ditte Buch Andersen, who says, I believe that people have the best intentions most of the time. So how to handle situations in business where unequal opportunities are happening due to unconscious biases and glass ceilings? Is it simply a matter of hitting people with the hard facts, or is there maybe a different approach? And I think, that might also be a question for both of you, because again, we are back to the unconscious bias, where I believe what Ditte maybe is asking into is, what if people believe they're doing the right things, but actually what is happening is something else?
Yeah, maybe I can comment on that. Like, I think there are different ways, at least from my experience, in the sense that you cannot change what you're not aware of. So so it takes awareness to change something. So for me, creating more mass awareness, like what we do in the villages, I call it social soil. You need social soil where things can grow. You need to shake up the soil first and make people aware that there is an issue and how they relate to that. And for me, from there, you start to, I'm even corporates, I would say, like the more grassroots approach, where you inform people, make them aware of this, and let them start to think about what is not right about this. And also ask that more ethical or emotional question, like what's not fair about it. So for me, it's yes, the facts and data are great and important, and it needs to change. And I think policy-wise, you can definitely change a lot. But at the same time, to build that movement of people and giving them the space to change things and to address things, and use also, like, we got used to these things which are not right. So for me, to fuel maybe that anger in a way even, and to give people space to do something about it. So I think that would be my advice also more in corporate settings, because if it's just a change project, you might miss that more deeper, let's say, angle and the kind of injustice to it.
And the energy. So Gine, what does your maybe research, but also just experience and your good advice, and when you look into the literature studies of companies who have actually succeeded with doing something right, what is it they have done?
Often it's it's characterized by us having clear targets and adjusting processes to make sure that these, the HR processes, the performance management system, that's transparent, it's objective, you support your leaders, yes, and that's that's just let's just accept that we all have biases, and somehow it also helps us in managing our day-to-day work life. We just need to get rid of the bias that creates inequalities. So try to help leaders actually make the right choice as easy as possible for them by having transparent toolboxes, very objective ways of assessing performance, and then constantly following up with data. And I of course acknowledge the importance of awareness, and also like the energy around a project like this. I think maybe I'm just damaged by trying to work with this for just only 3 years full time, right? But having seen like that, I at least see that the arguments that we succeed with the most when we try to push the needle with companies is the business argument, that this is good for business. And not saying that it's good for the bottom line, because there's all sorts of we can talk about methods and how to calculate that, is that even true and stuff, but just like having a business and a sense of community feeling where you can be yourself, and you can actually bring your different perspectives into team settings and really try to innovate. That will create much more business for the specific company, in general, at least, right? And that really resonates, at least from in a Danish setting, because I think we've tried the fairness argument. It just doesn't hold true for so many people, because they, I don't know why. It's just I can just conclude that what we succeed with the most is just talking about competitive companies that uses their resources and talents to the largest extent possible. So saying that this, if you have really, for example, if you have large leaking pipelines of women coming from across your job level hierarchies, it's a waste of potential. It's a waste of talent, and you're not tapping into that full talent pool. And maybe it's just also the old management consultant within me pushing those arguments as well. But it resonates pretty well with who we talk to in a Danish setting, at least. Because so I think that's. So that's really what works for us, and also what we see from research works best within companies is building like that transparency, objective, data-driven strategy development.
And when we look at the stereotypes, we still have a lot of unconscious bias here. I recently ran a workshop for 100 people who were working within the industry of medicine. So it was doctors and other people present at this workshop. And I asked this, you probably might know this riddle about a father and his son who are in a car accident, and the father dies at the scene, and the son is rushed to the hospital. At the hospital, the surgeon looks at the boy and says, "Oh, I can't operate because this is my son." So, and then we ask, who is, the surgeon? And maybe we can even ask you, the audience listening in here, to just comment in the section of comments. So a lot of people hear answers from an unconscious level. Well, he just died. So how can it be, right? That surgeon who was there to operate the son. And it doesn't dawn on people that the surgeon could be the mother, because usually it's a man who has that position, right? So with this thing in mind. Let's see if someone. Oh, that's a question actually. Okay, I thought someone would maybe answer this question here, but the thing is that we still have those unconscious biases, and when women at the workplace maybe encounter some of these unconscious biases, might just be small things they're told, like, you know, you should just look nice in your dress and shut up and listen and learn. And what would your advice be to a woman experiencing those unconscious biases? B.
Dave, do you have any golden advice?
As a man for women? This is really entering dangerous territory. I just can say, like, I think on the male side, a lot needs to be done. So we again start to talk what should the woman do and stuff. Like, I think there's a lot to be done by men, and I think the unawareness is very big at the male side. So I think that's important to start in many companies as well. In the Netherlands, we had an initiative. They call it like the 7 check boxes. Like, if you have studied at a great university and you have wealthy parents and you're native and everything, like, it caused a lot of, let's say, awareness about how privileged are you, how do you operate, and it was a great starting point for things. So things like that, I think they can help. For women, what I see happening with women is, like, I was in Ivory Coast 2 weeks ago in a very poor community with a lot of cocoa farmers. And I was with my colleague. She's leading our Gambian operations, where we have trained about 40,000 women. And the way she was addressing them, it was very interesting. Like, she said, like, I'm one of you. I've always one of 14 children. I've never been able to make my own choices. I had to go through life. But she said, at some point, even if you are in a kind of desperate situation and you're used to the situation, don't look outside, but look inside and look at, there's always space to think, to make things, to shape things in a different way. So you're not victim of the circumstances, but there's our ways to do it. And I think, like, there is something there, like, keep on talking about how bad these biases are and stuff like that. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So my invitation would more to show the action, to come up with initiatives, to lead by example. And yes, use the data as a starting point, and to create the awareness and the urgency, both on a personal level but at a business level, but then also to kind of step up and kind of start to ignore these things. Like, the women that we work with start to ignore, in a good way, let's say, the burdens that have been placed on them. And then once you find companions in that, it kind of lifts you up, and it's like they lift each other up and take each other forward. So that's what I would see happening. And that leads to, it sparks, let's say, enthusiasm. It starts hope. It starts to give courage. We see it when the women, we see from our research, they start to earn more money. It gives them also more confidence. They go more out. So it becomes a positive spiral of things. But it starts at the level of the women, but also not having the feeling I have to do this alone, but I do this with other women or with men. And I think there are more and more men. If I look at the Dutch, maybe still it's 80% or 70% male CEOs. But if I zoom in on the younger male CEOs, I see much more balance between feminine and masculine qualities than in the old days, which were much more, let's say, authoritarian and directive. So I think there is a lot of opening and awareness about to change this. So my message, and maybe it's my idealism as well, is like, there is so much more possible, and just start ignore these things a little bit, and don't, you can. I started to not judge other people. Like, I just label it as unawareness. It's not bad intentions, but you're just not aware. So how can I blame you for this? So I don't mind. I just go on. We continue to go on. So for me, sometimes it's like to be less bothered by these things. Of course, they do touch you. I understand, but at the same time, don't let them discourage you in a way.
Kine, what's your take?
Yeah, I would say so. Like, I would say that the most important thing from my perspective would be to find a way to try to not, and I think that's what you're saying, Dave, as well. Like, don't be bothered with it, but I would say, like, to try to not take it in as something that's wrong with you. Try not to let it impact your self-esteem or your view on, is this a place for me? Is this, do I belong here? But more try to point it outwards, to say this is a symptom of, or like an example of, gender stereotypes that I'm now experiencing, and has nothing to do with me specifically. It's like a structural thing. And what, a lot of companies as well, what they often do initiative wise is that they build like ERGs, like employee resource groups, or they try to build like networks internally of, and what they typically would do is that they would bring minorities together, like minorities either in a company, like, not that women are a minority, but they are in some perspectives, in some settings, but try to bring them together to kind of like have them share experiences and views and numbers, and to normalize some of these experiences. Not that not that it's supposed to be a normal thing to experience gender stereotypes, neither for men nor women, but to do that, to make sure that it doesn't impact how you see yourself, because that's what shouldn't happen. And I think that's the only thing I would say, because I would just point I would just focus my focus on the structural things. So, but women often ask me, what should I do in this perspective? Like, how do I build a powerful network that would give me the next promotion? It's, I would much rather just talk at a structural level, because that's what we need to fix, and not the individual itself.
And I think maybe what we have time for, we only have 4 more minutes, but there's another question here about, do you have more concrete examples of proactive changes done in organizations to compensate for some of these biases we might still experience?
Yeah, there's one example which I liked, and years back I was in a discussion, it was involving the Queen Maxima in the Netherlands, who's a lot in finance inclusion. She was kind of bashing the Dutch banks also for this like 1.8% of equity that goes and startup funding that goes to women. And she said, like, this is impossible. We talk about microfinance in faraway countries, and how is this possible? So she was kind of putting the banks on trial in a way, and it led to a major initiative in the Netherlands, and I think in many other countries, to really a structural approach to check all the male biases in finance industry, to train people about that, to go back to processes, how are, let's say, applications reviewed. But it also led to a lot of women in powerful positions or aspiring positions coming together, and a lot of energy was created around it. So I felt that was a nice example where I've seen a lot of changes, but it was also a rigorous process in these countries, like companies, like every credit assessor, for example, male or female, went to these training programs to make them aware. So it was at the same time reviewing some, let's say, decisions there. So I think these are interesting examples to see.
Yes. And Gine, maybe that's also back to your whole initiative with Equalis, to have the numbers ready, so that we can maybe then argue for those initiatives still needed to train people. But I want to give you both a fair chance to round things up. We are 2 minutes before closing this webinar. And Gine, I want to start with you. Any last words, things you want to say to the audience, or things we can do to accelerate action when it comes to gender equality at the workplace?
I just had a few reflections from last week when we published our 3rd diversity barometer, and we have the Minister of Gender Equality in Denmark also saying a few words. And I think it's some actually said that this is the first gender equality minister in Denmark we've had that had actually acknowledged head on we don't have gender equality in Denmark. So, and we've had one for, I think, 25 years or something. So it says a lot that, that's still the victory that we celebrate. That is actually acknowledging that we have an issue, right? So I would just say that using facts and data to move the needle and to build the awareness is often very effective, especially when we're still discussing whether we have an issue or not.
And Dave, any last recommendations from you?
Yeah, what I learned over the past 13 years from all these women is so much to put women on stage and put the man in a listening position. I think that would be a good start. And also the idea that we learned that bringing things to the doorstep of people, in other words, make it super accessible to start and to spread, and don't overthink this, but just start a lot of actions, and at the same time use the data and everything for the strategic discussions and the structural things. So I think that's a good combination to go for.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, both of you, Gine and Dave, for joining us here today. And thank you to our audience for listening in. We've enjoyed this, and we will share some resources with you on our last slide for today. But thank you so much, both of you, and see you later. Bye-bye.